She owed the hospital $42,187. Her grandmother was fighting to stay alive, and they wouldn't lift a finger until the deposit was made. So when a man in a black suit, someone she barely knew, asked her, "How much do you need?" She gave him the number with tears running down her face. He didn't blink. He wired the money on the spot. No contracts, no receipts, just one request: spend the night with me. No expectations, just time. She said yes. 6 weeks later, she was pregnant. 3 babies. And when he came back, thinking he had a right to claim them, she looked him in the eyes and said, "You can't have them. They're mine." Before we go deeper, hit that like button, subscribe to Mr. Ross Story Trail, and drop a heart in the comments if you believe some people walk into your life for a reason. This story will make you rethink what love really is. Tell me something. What would you do if the man who saved your family turned around and asked to become the father of children you never meant to create together? Would you give him a chance, or would you protect your peace, even if it meant raising them alone? Nalia was used to going unnoticed. She didn't wear flashy clothes. She didn't beg for attention. She worked 2 jobs, took care of her sick grandmother, and made it through life one quiet sacrifice at a time. But something about her softness, something about the way she treated people even when the world had been cruel to her, stood out. That's why Kaylin Adero kept coming back. Not for her looks, not for attention, but because for the first time in years, someone looked at him and saw a man, not a millionaire, not a walking investment, not a headline. Just a man. She served him coffee like she would anyone else. Called him sir once, then just Kaylin. No questions about his car, no interest in his company. Just genuine, unfiltered presence. And when his world started feeling too loud, he found himself returning to her corner of silence. But love doesn't always enter loudly. Sometimes it slips in during quiet moments, like a warm cup of coffee on a cold night, or a single night that wasn't meant to mean anything. Until it did. Because that night changed everything. When Nalia found out she was pregnant, she didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just sat there, holding the test, listening to her grandmother breathing softly in the next room, and whispered, "It's just me now." And she meant it. She didn't chase him, didn't call, didn't post online. She chose silence, she chose peace. She chose to protect her babies, even if it meant doing it alone. But peace doesn't last forever. 1 year later, he saw her again. And this time she wasn't in an apron, she wasn't working a booth. She was holding a baby, and there were 3 strollers behind her. Kaylin froze. He wasn't sure if time stopped, or if it just moved slower when your past shows up holding your future in her arms. He didn't make a scene, didn't call her name. He just walked toward her, step by step, like a man approaching a truth he wasn't ready for. When she turned and saw him, her eyes widened. Not in fear, not in anger, just in realization. Like the part of her that had hoped he wouldn't find her finally caught up to the moment he did. She adjusted the blanket over the baby's chest. The others, twins in matching carriers, squirmed gently behind her, softly, clearly. "They're mine. I raised them. I carried them. You don't get to walk in and take them." He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, with something breaking inside his chest. Because in that moment, he realized something. She hadn't just kept the children from him. She'd kept her pain, her strength, her entire second life. She had already built a world without him. And now he had to ask himself, would he fight for a place in it, or quietly walk away from the only family he'd ever felt connected to? This isn't a story about secrets, it's about choices, about a woman who learned how to protect what mattered most, and a man who had to prove he was worthy of being more than just a moment in her life. So if you're still here, stay with me, because what comes next will test their hearts, their limits, and everything they thought love was supposed to be. Atlanta's morning traffic had its own rhythm. Horns barked like impatient dogs, engines hummed on idle, sidewalks clicked with heels and hopes. But inside Willow Street Diner, the world was slower. Duller, a place where time stood still just long enough to refill a coffee cup. Nalia had been working there since she was 21. Now, at 27, her routine hadn't changed much, except the lines under her eyes had deepened, and the tips had gotten smaller. The diner smelled like old grease and burnt toast. It wasn't fancy, but it stayed open, and so did she. She tied her apron the same way every shift, hair pulled into a puff bun, sneakers worn thin at the sole. Her name tag read Nalia, though most of the regulars didn't need to look. "Table 5 wants extra bacon but no eggs," said Carla, sliding past her with 2 chipped plates. "Got it," Nalia replied, grabbing the pot of coffee from the warmer. She moved like someone who didn't need to think, reflexes trained by necessity. Each booth was muscle memory. Each order, another minute closer to the end of a long day. But her mind wasn't in the diner, not fully. It was on her grandmother. Home was just 6 blocks away, but it might as well have been another planet. There, the real work began, managing prescriptions, organizing insurance forms, making grocery lists around coupons. Her grandmother had raised her. Now she bathed her, paid her bills, and reminded her to eat when she forgot. This morning, Nalia skipped breakfast. Again. Instead, she slid $18 into an envelope for her grandmother's blood pressure meds. That left her with $11 for the week. Just enough for a loaf of bread, a small jar of peanut butter, and bus fare, if she skipped one trip and walked instead. She didn't complain, not out loud. She just adjusted her ponytail, rubbed her temples, and poured another cup for a stranger who wouldn't remember her name. There was a quiet dignity to her struggle. No one really saw it. Not the man who left his toast half-eaten, not the cook who mumbled orders from behind the grill, and certainly not the couple arguing at the counter about gas money. But it was there, in the way she tucked in the receipt so it wouldn't fall off the table, in the way she remembered every regular's order, even the picky ones, in the way she smiled, even when her stomach growled between shifts. She wasn't trying to be a hero, she was just trying to make it through Tuesday. "You okay?" Carla asked, pausing beside her. "Yeah, just tired." That was the answer she always gave. Never mind the 2 hours of sleep. Never mind the hospital bills piling on the kitchen table. Never mind the aching in her lower back that she couldn't afford to get checked out. Just tired. Because anything deeper than that would spill into a place she couldn't afford to go. The diner's clock ticked louder near the end of the shift. Nalia glanced at it again. Almost time to rush home, help her grandmother with her noon pills, and head to job number 2, cleaning offices downtown. She hadn't eaten all day. She tucked a saltine packet into her bag on the way out, just in case. The key turned stiff in the lock like everything in her life, functional but tired. Nalia stepped inside the apartment, closing the door softly behind her so it wouldn't startle her grandmother. The air inside was still, a little too warm. It always smelled faintly of menthol rub, lavender lotion, and fried okra from 3 nights ago. She dropped her work bag gently by the door and looked toward the couch. Her grandmother, Miss Ellie, was propped up with pillows, breathing shallow but steady. Her silver-gray scarf was slightly crooked, and her Bible rested on her chest, open to the same bookmarked page it had been for weeks. Nalia bent down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Morning, Mamir." Miss Ellie stirred, eyelids fluttering before she smiled. "You been out there feeding them folks again?" "Trying to keep them caffeinated," Nalia said, kneeling beside her with a soft grin. She lifted the medication tray from the coffee table, 8 pill bottles, 2 missing labels, 1 nearly empty. Every dollar Nalia made was already spoken for. Rent, CO pays, utilities, half payments on old debts, gas cards, emergency groceries. There was never a moment she could breathe without calculating what it would cost her. She unscrewed 1 bottle and shook out 2 tablets. "You need to eat first," Nalia said, getting up. The fridge held half a tomato, 2 eggs, and a near-empty jar of apple jelly. The eggs were for tomorrow. The tomato was soft. She grabbed a slice of bread, popped it in the toaster, and buttered it with what was left of a small packet she'd saved from work. She cut it diagonally, like her grandmother liked, and placed it on a plate. Miss Ellie took 2 bites and nodded. "You always find a way." Nalia didn't respond. Her throat tightened. She packed her grandmother's evening pills in a sandwich bag for later, labeled it with a marker. Her handwriting was always neat, even when her hands trembled from fatigue. "Great is thy faithfulness" played. Nalia hummed along softly while folding laundry she hadn't had time to put away for 3 days. Her movements were slow but certain. Socks, towels, undershirts, clean, pressed, organized. Even in chaos, she kept order. Because control over small things was all she had left, there was no room for complaint. No audience for her exhaustion. No one waiting to ask her how she was. But still, she moved with care. She served her grandmother her toast like it was prepared at a 5-star brunch. She cleaned the sink like she was expecting guests. She set her own hunger aside like it was an afterthought. Because in Nalia's world, survival was stitched into grace. Every act, no matter how routine, was her quiet rebellion against giving up. At 4:45 p.m., she changed clothes. Job 2 required black pants and a dark blue polo. She brushed her edges, checked her teeth in the mirror, and slipped on her cheap sneakers. The soles had worn thin, but they still worked, mostly. Before leaving, she placed a note next to her grandmother's water. "Be back by 10. Take your second set with food. I love you." She stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching the person who raised her shrink into someone more fragile, more dependent. But she wouldn't let it show. She blew her a kiss and stepped into the hallway. The stairwell light flickered. She didn't flinch. She just kept moving, one step at a time, into the next shift, into the next hour, into the next stretch of effort that wouldn't show on any check stub. Downtown Atlanta looked alive at night, but Nalia wasn't part of the nightlife. She was part of the cleanup crew. The office building lobby smelled like floor wax and recycled air. It was quiet, sterile, the kind of place where decisions worth millions were made by people who never stayed late enough to see who scrubbed the coffee stains off their boardroom tables. Nalia signed in at the security desk, nodded at the night guard, and climbed the stairs to the third floor. The elevator had been stuck for weeks, but she didn't mind the climb. It gave her time to breathe and think. She pushed open the supply closet, grabbed her gloves, and started her route. Desks, trash bins, smudged glass. The motions were the same every night. Disinfect, wipe, repeat. But the quiet gave her mind room to wander. She thought about bills, about the envelope under the mattress with a few folded tens and singles, about the voicemail she hadn't opened yet, probably from the power company again. She thought about Mamir's prescriptions, about the way her hands trembled a little more than usual this morning, about the night she collapsed in the hallway 6 months ago, and how Nalia still had nightmares of that sound. She thought about her life, and how it had become an endless string of cleaning up after people who never even looked down. One of the offices had a family photo on the desk, smiling parents, 2 little girls, a golden retriever. It wasn't even a particularly striking photo, but it stopped Nalia for a second. Not because she envied it, not exactly, but because somewhere deep inside her, she wondered if that kind of life was meant for people like her, people who didn't have backup plans, who didn't have anyone to call when the water heater broke, people who couldn't afford rest. She turned the frame slightly so it wouldn't fall, then emptied the trash beneath the desk and moved on. She reached into her back pocket, pulled out a folded post-it note, and read it quietly under her breath. It was a list she wrote to herself every week. Mamir's checkup next Wednesday, rice and beans restock, don't cry today. She had added that last one 3 weeks ago. Some days it worked. Tonight wasn't one of them. But tears didn't come loudly. They built slowly, like dust in corners. By the time she reached the supply room again, her vision was foggy. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve and grabbed the mop. No one applauds invisible work. No one sees the girl wiping someone else's fingerprints off a glass door, or restocking the toilet paper like she's running a palace, or sweeping crumbs no one would miss. But Nalia took pride in doing it right. Because even if the world didn't notice her effort, she did. That meant something, even if it didn't feel like enough. At 9:55 p.m. she clocked out. Her shift lead didn't say a word. No goodbye, no thank you. Just the sound of a clipboard being set down and the buzz of vending machines nearby. Nalia walked 3 blocks to the bus stop. The street lights flickered above her. She counted every step on the cracked sidewalk. 12 more hours and she'd do it all again. By the time Nalia got home, the hallway smelled like mothballs and microwaved leftovers. Apartment 2B's TV was blasting again, some game show, but she barely registered it. She pushed open the door to her unit and stepped inside. The living room light was off, but the soft glow from the kitchen nightlight gave her enough to see. Miss Ellie was asleep. Her chest rose and fell gently beneath the crocheted blanket. The second dose of pills was taken. Nalia could tell by the empty cup and the corner of toast left untouched on the side table. Nalia exhaled slowly. She didn't even realize she'd been holding her breath. She locked the door behind her and slipped off her shoes, careful not to make a sound. Her rest didn't begin with a shower or a warm meal. It started with silence. She stood in the kitchen and leaned against the counter for a minute, just letting her feet stop aching. The fridge still hummed its tired little song. The fan in the corner squeaked on every 4th rotation. Somewhere outside, a siren moaned. She took a sip of water straight from the faucet. That would be dinner tonight. There wasn't anything in the fridge worth calling a meal. She wasn't even hungry anymore. Hunger was a feeling you got used to, until it just became background noise. She opened her phone and tapped on the calendar app. A red circle around the 12th. Rent due in 4 days. Her balance? $86.42. She turned the phone off and set it face down. Then, she sat on the edge of the couch and untied her headscarf, her hands moving slowly, deliberately. It was the only part of her day where she allowed herself softness. She massaged her scalp for a minute, rolled her ankles, wiggled her fingers, just to remind herself she was still here, still whole. She lit the last tea light candle she had in the drawer, set it on the window ledge. Its flicker made the room feel less empty. On a lined notebook near the TV tray, she scribbled a few words. Today wasn't pretty, but I made it. That was her version of rest. No bath bombs, no streaming shows, no long scroll through endless feeds, just survival. Spoken softly. She looked over at her grandmother, still asleep, then back at the candle. She whispered under her breath, Lord, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, but I'm trying." There was no reply, of course, but the flicker held steady. And sometimes, that was enough. It was Thursday morning when Nalia spotted Mr. Carter again. He sat in his usual spot outside the laundromat 2 blocks from the diner. Same faded jacket, same cup with a few crumpled bills inside. A quiet man, didn't beg, just nodded politely at people walking by. Nalia walked past him every week on her way in. Most people did. But this time, she stopped. She reached into her bag and pulled out a wrapped muffin she had pocketed from the diner's leftover tray the night before. "It's not warm," she said, holding it out, "but it's sweet." Mr. Carter looked up, eyes heavy, voice quiet. "You always give even when it looks like you don't have nothing left." She smiled. "Giving's not just about what you have. It's about what you're willing to share." She didn't wait for him to say thank you. That wasn't the point. It was just what felt right. Kindness had always come naturally to her, even if it cost her in ways people never noticed. She gave up her place in line at the clinic for an older woman who couldn't stand long. She covered Carla's shift last week when her coworker had a babysitter cancel. She spent her own last $10 once on diapers for her upstairs neighbor, who was between paychecks. And no one ever asked her to. Nalia didn't keep score. She didn't do it for praise, but she also didn't talk about how those moments added up, how they stretched an already thin life thinner. Because when you live paycheck to paycheck, kindness has a cost. Still, she paid it anyway. One night, her friend Janelle from the diner pulled her aside. "Girl, why do you always let people pull from your cup when yours is empty?" Nalia just shrugged. "Because I know what it feels like to need, and have no one notice." That was the thing about her heart. It was worn down but still open, still reaching. Even when her back ached, even when her bank account hovered near zero, she found a way to give. The world hadn't made space for her softness, but she carried it anyway, not because it made life easier, but because it made life hers. It started like any other morning. The kettle clicked off with a soft pop. Nalia poured warm water over a tea bag and placed the cup near her grandmother's favorite chair. Miss Ellie was slower getting up today, but she always was when the weather shifted. "You want eggs?" Nalia asked from the kitchen. There was no reply. "Mimir?" She poked her head into the living room. Miss Ellie sat slumped slightly, head bowed like she had nodded off. Nalia moved closer. "Mimir, hey, you all right?" When she touched her shoulder, the older woman's body leaned too far to the left, loose, unstable. Then Nalia saw it. The side of her grandmother's face, limp, one eye blinking slower than the other. The mug slid from Nalia's hand and shattered on the floor. Everything moved fast and slow at the same time. She couldn't remember what she screamed into the phone when she dialed for help. Couldn't remember grabbing the keys, pulling her grandmother's shoes on, or checking if she had her insurance card. All she remembered was the sound of sirens as the ambulance doors closed, and the emptiness beside her as she rode in the front seat alone. At the hospital, words blurred together. Suspected stroke, urgent scans, waiting for neurologist. Nalia nodded, signed things, answered questions. Inside, she was breaking. After 3 hours, a nurse came out holding a clipboard. "She's stable for now, but we'll need to admit her for further evaluation. Based on her scans, it looks like she'll need at least 4 days under observation and possibly therapy afterward." Nalia nodded, barely breathing. "There's a required deposit before we can continue with the full intake." The nurse checked her chart. 42,000, just under 42 to start. The room tilted. Not literally, but in her mind, everything felt unsteady. She didn't have $400, let alone 42,000. The GoFundMe Janelle helped her set up a month ago had barely passed 600. Her 2 jobs wouldn't scratch the surface. Her credit was too max to even attempt a loan. She pressed her fingers into her eyes to stop the room from spinning. "Can you hold her overnight?" she whispered. "We can only monitor her until morning without a financial commitment." Nalia nodded slowly, then turned, stepped outside the hospital entrance, and sank down behind a vending machine where no one could see her fall apart. That was the moment, not when she cried, but when she stopped trying not to. The sky was fading into late evening by the time Nalia made it back near the diner. Her shift was long over, but she didn't go home. She couldn't face the empty apartment, not without her grandmother in it. So instead, she walked, wandered behind the alley where the back door to Willow Street Diner was always propped open with a brick. She sat on the crates beside the old trash bins, arms folded over her knees, her face buried in her arms. Tears had dried. Now came the stillness after the storm, the kind that made you feel like the world had gone on spinning, but left you behind. She didn't notice the car at first. It was quiet, parked just a few feet down the alley. Black, sleek, way too clean for this part of town. But the man leaning against it, she recognized him. Kalen. He didn't belong here, which made his presence even more jarring. He wasn't in his usual crisp blazer today. No gold cufflinks, no wristwatch peeking out, just jeans, a dark tee, and that calm, unreadable face. He looked at her for a moment, not with pity, just recognition. "You okay?" he asked. She wanted to lie, say she was fine, say it was nothing. Instead, she let out a dry laugh. No, not even close. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He just walked over, leaned against the brick wall beside her, and looked forward. They sat like that for a full minute. No words, just two people existing in the same pocket of pain. "I saw you through the window," he said finally. "You didn't come out after your shift." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "You check on all your waitresses like this?" "No," he said. "Just the ones who look like they're holding up the sky alone." She didn't have the energy to pretend. So she told him, not everything, just enough, about her grandmother, the hospital bill, the impossible number. She said it with her eyes on the pavement, ashamed, embarrassed, exhausted. He didn't flinch. He didn't ask questions. He pulled out his phone, opened an app, tapped a few times, then he looked at her and said 4 words that made her breath catch. "It's taken care of." "What?" She blinked, stunned. He held the phone up, showed her the transfer confirmation. "Consider it done." Her heart raced. No, I can't let you." "I don't want repayment," he interrupted gently. She shook her head. "I can't just take—" "I'm not asking you to take anything," he said quietly. "I'm asking for a night, just one. No pressure, no expectations, just company, just time." The silence stretched. She looked at him, looked into him. She wasn't scared. She wasn't confused. She was torn, because something about him felt heavy too. Not dangerous, just human. She didn't know him, but maybe for one night they could both pretend the world didn't hurt so much. And so she said yes, not because she was bought, not because she was weak, but because something inside her whispered, "He sees you." And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like something worth saying yes to. Kalen Adero didn't come from money. He came from sweat, stubbornness, and nights sleeping on a mattress with springs poking through the fabric. He'd grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 people and one dream: get out. And he did. By 32, he was CEO of a tech firm valued at over $500 million. He'd been profiled in finance magazines, spoken at conferences, and headlined panels about innovation and disruption. He had the house, the cars, the tailored suits, the corner office with a skyline view. But in recent months, all of it felt like background noise. He had built a life that looked perfect. From the outside, inside, he hadn't felt real in years. His days were packed with meetings that meant nothing to him anymore. Metrics, valuations, growth forecasts. He spoke fluently in corporate language, but it no longer moved him. His assistant scheduled everything down to the minute. Lunch orders, investor calls, even how long he should smile in group photos. And yet, in every polished mirror he passed, he saw a man drifting further from who he used to be. Kalen wasn't lost. He was simply tired of being useful, respected, managed. He craved something simple, something unscripted. That craving is what led him to Willow Street Diner on a Thursday evening 6 months ago. He didn't plan it. He was driving aimlessly, needing space, and spotted the flickering sign. He parked his car, sleek, expensive, and entirely out of place, and walked in. And for the first time in months, he could breathe. No one greeted him with fake enthusiasm. No one asked what company he ran. No one even looked up, except her. A woman in a worn apron, with soft eyes and a tired smile, walked over with a coffee pot and said, "You want a booth or counter?" He blinked. "Booth." She nodded. "Take your time. I'll be right there." She didn't flirt. She didn't glance at his watch or raise an eyebrow at the key fob on the table. She treated him like a man who wanted dinner. That was it. She poured his coffee, dropped off a menu, and asked, "Need a few minutes?" "Yes," he said, surprised at how much he meant it. He sat there for nearly 2 hours. No laptop, no calls, just him, a burger, and the occasional sound of plates clinking in the kitchen. She didn't hover, but every now and then, she passed by with that same gentle pace, refilling his cup without needing to be asked. And when she brought his check, he realized he didn't want to leave, not because of the food, not because of her looks, but because, for a moment, he had felt human again. He returned the next week, and the one after that, same booth, same order, same silence. But with each visit, his edges softened, the tension in his jaw eased. The polite stiffness in his shoulders dropped an inch. The pinched look in his eyes, common among people constantly in control, faded by degrees, and every time he came back, she was there. Nalia didn't ask questions, didn't pry, didn't even seem curious, but that was exactly why he kept returning. The fourth time he came in, she raised an eyebrow playfully and said, "We're out of blueberry pie. You going to be okay?" He smirked for the first time in what felt like a month. "I think I'll survive." "Well," she replied, scribbling on her notepad, "try the apple. It's judgment-free comfort food." That night he left a generous tip, folded neatly under the saucer, like always. But this time, he also left a note. "You were right. The apple helped." She didn't react the next time he came in. No mention of the note. Just filled his coffee and said, "You want the usual?" He nodded. That became the rhythm. He learned her name by reading her tag. She learned his only when he paid with a card, and she glanced at the receipt. "Kaylin," she said softly, like she was testing how the name felt on her tongue. He looked up. "Yeah?" "Nothing," she said, just finally putting a name to the booth. What Kaylin loved most was how little she cared about who he was. She never Googled him, never asked what he did, never commented when a man in a suit 2 tables away whispered his name in recognition. She gave him something he hadn't experienced in years, neutral space. A space where he wasn't impressive or disappointing, just present. In the boardroom he was followed. In the press he was dissected. In this booth, he was just a man eating pancakes at 8:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. And he wasn't invisible, but he wasn't on display either. There was a comfort in that, a peace he couldn't explain. Kaylin had eaten in places where the plates were cleared between every course and the water had a sommelier. He'd flown private more times than he could count, had a personal driver who knew the names of every board member's assistant. His wardrobe was hand-measured in 3 countries, and his condo had windows so large they didn't need art on the walls. And yet, none of that made him feel as full as a paper receipt with Nalia's handwriting on it that simply said, "Thanks for being kind today." She didn't even remember writing it. It was just something she'd scribbled in passing, maybe after a long shift, maybe after seeing the quiet sadness in his eyes. But Kaylin held onto that little slip of paper like it was gold. He kept it tucked into his wallet, right behind his black card. Because in a life where everything had a price, Nalia's kindness was one of the few things he couldn't buy. His assistant once asked him why he always scheduled a 2-hour gap on Thursday evenings. "I've got a standing appointment," he said vaguely. "With who?" She didn't ask, but he wasn't meeting anyone for business. He was sitting in a booth in a low-ceilinged diner with a chipped salt shaker and a waitress who never tried to impress him. And that was the point. He noticed her little habits over time, how she checked the coffee burner every 15 minutes, how she gave extra napkins to moms with toddlers without them asking, how she covered for Carla without complaining, despite the fact that she looked like she hadn't had a full night's sleep in a month. She carried the weight of the world like it was routine. And she did it without losing her gentleness. That alone disarmed him. One night he asked her, "Do you ever get tired of being the strong one?" She paused and replied, "Every single day." There was no bitterness in her voice, just truth. And that truth hit him harder than any argument he'd ever lost, harder than any deal that had fallen through. Because for all the resources Kaylin had, strength without support was something even he hadn't learned how to survive. There was something about the way she moved through the world, unapologetic, real. And it made him question how much of his own life had been designed for show instead of substance. Kaylin was used to noise, digital calendars buzzing, analysts calling, emails flooding in during dinner, private chefs clattering pans in his kitchen while he paced through quarterly reviews on Bluetooth. But that diner? It had a quiet rhythm, not silence, not stillness, just life, unrushed, unfiltered, and oddly comforting. The coffee machine hissed, forks scraped against plates. An old jukebox hummed from the corner, sometimes playing blues, sometimes gospel. And Nalia, she moved through it like a metronome, consistent, measured, entirely present. He started to notice things he'd never had time for, like how she smoothed the sugar packets in their holder when she thought no one was watching, how she pulled her sleeves down slightly before walking past a loud group of men, how her smile always came from the eyes first, never forced, never automatic. She never asked if he was okay, but she always checked if his coffee needed a top-up. It was her way of saying, "You're still seen." One night as the diner emptied out and she wiped down a table 2 booths away, he spoke without looking up. "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if things had gone easier?" She glanced over her shoulder. "Sure," she said, still wiping. "But easier doesn't mean better. Sometimes the struggle shapes who we're supposed to become." Kaylin had sat in front of million-dollar consultants who couldn't drop wisdom that clean. He thought about how much he paid people to tell him what he already knew, and how much value there was in someone like her just saying it out loud. For free, no agenda, no invoice to follow. One Thursday, he brought a book instead of a phone. She noticed. "No laptop tonight?" she asked, dropping his usual order slip on the table. He smiled, trying something different. She nodded, as if approving something deeper than his reading habits. That night, after she cleared his table, she left behind a napkin with something scribbled in black ink. "Sometimes quiet is where the truth gets loud." He kept that one too. Kaylin's therapist once told him, "You don't need more money. You need meaning." At the time, he brushed it off. He was building an empire. Who had time for poetry? But on his 8th visit to Willow Street Diner, watching Nalia help an elderly man button his coat after he spilled soup on himself, he remembered those words. Maybe meaning lived in smaller places, not in IPO projections or strategy decks, but in how she held space for people, without asking for anything in return. At the office, people flattered him, imitated him, watched him, but no one saw him. Nalia didn't flatter or follow. She just noticed. She noticed when his shoulders sagged even if he didn't say a word. She noticed when he barely touched his food and quietly offered to box it, no questions asked. She noticed that he always folded his napkin the same way, and that when she asked how his week had been, he never said good. He just shrugged. And still she came back to refill his coffee like nothing was broken. That did more for him than 1,000 "you're doing great" ever could. Kaylin started shifting things around his life just to make space for those 2 hours each Thursday. Meetings got rescheduled, investor dinners postponed. Even his driver started waiting outside the diner without needing instruction. No valet, no calls, just routine. One Thursday, he didn't show. Nalia didn't ask about it the next week. She just poured his coffee and said, "Missed your usual." That was it. No guilt, no teasing. Just a place still held open for him, without explanation. He hadn't realized how much he needed that kind of acceptance, space to come and go, to be seen without performance. It was something his world never gave him. He watched her work, week after week, wearing the same worn sneakers, wiping tables with tired hands, laughing with customers like her life wasn't heavy. He didn't know the full story, but he didn't need to, because what he did know was this. Every time he left that diner, he felt lighter, not because of what was said, but because, with her, nothing needed to be said. It had been nearly 3 months since Kaylin first walked into Willow Street Diner. By now, his booth felt like his own personal refuge. The seat molded to his posture, the chipped laminate table had its familiar scratch marks, and Nalia's handwriting on the receipt had become something of a signature goodbye. But something was different tonight. She seemed quieter, not tired. She was always tired, but distracted. When she brought his plate, her eyes lingered a second longer. Not searching, not avoiding, just pausing. Kaylin noticed. "You good?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then gave a thin smile. One of those days. He didn't push. He never did. But when she stepped away, something in his chest tightened. He'd spent years ignoring people's feelings for the sake of productivity. But hers? He wanted to understand it. Later that night, when the diner thinned out and the rush ended, she brought him a fresh cup without asking. No one else was left but them and the cook, half dozing behind the window. Kaylin looked at her across the table. "I never ask about your life," he said, "but I think about it more than you know." She blinked. He wasn't flirting. His tone wasn't loaded. It was real, and real caught her off guard. "My grandmother's not well," she said softly. "That's why I work so much. Meds aren't cheap. Nothing's cheap." He nodded slowly. "You take care of her alone?" "Yeah. And who takes care of you?" She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "People like me don't get that luxury." The words hung there, not as bitterness, but as fact. And Kaylin understood in a way few others could, because for all his power, he had built a life where no one checked in unless they needed something. That night, instead of leaving after paying his bill, he stayed, just sat there, quietly, until her shift ended. She came over to grab his mug. He looked up. "Walk with me?" he asked. Outside, the streets were calm. A warm breeze passed through. They didn't talk much, just walked side by side. Their steps matched without effort. Their silence wasn't heavy, it was steady. When they reached her corner, she stopped. "Thanks for the company." He nodded. "Anytime." She turned to go, then paused. "You're not like the others who sit in that booth. I'm not trying to be." She looked at him one more time, longer than she ever had before. Then she disappeared inside. Kaylin stood there for a moment, still, not rushed, not lost, just still. And in that stillness, something shifted, not between them, not yet, but inside him. He didn't just want her time anymore. He wanted to matter in her world, The phone call came just after sunrise. Nalia had dozed off for maybe 20 minutes after her night shift, still wearing her diner uniform, curled up on the edge of the couch with her phone under her pillow. When it buzzed, her heart shot to her throat. It was the hospital. Miss Ellie had taken a sudden turn overnight. The staff had stabilized her, but the swelling was worse than they'd hoped. The stroke wasn't minor, it was serious. The neurologist recommended a full monitoring protocol, followed by inpatient rehabilitation, but none of that could begin until a deposit was made. "Ma'am," the voice on the other end said plainly, "we're doing what we can, but our system requires a financial confirmation to proceed with long-term care." Nalia swallowed hard. "How much?" The line went quiet for a beat. $41,872. That's the base. It'll likely go up with therapy. Nalia barely managed a breath. She said thank you, though it didn't feel like the right thing to say, and hung up. The apartment felt like a vacuum. Miss Ellie's robe was still hanging on the back of the bedroom door. Her favorite slippers were tucked under the coffee table. The floral cushion on her recliner still held the imprint of her shape. Nalia stood in the middle of the room, clutching the phone, staring at nothing. Then she moved, because if she didn't move, she'd fall apart. She gathered her purse, slipped on her shoes, and walked out the door like her legs were moving on their own. She ended up at the diner, not inside. She didn't have a shift that day, but behind it, out back past the loading area where no one would see her. She sank to the concrete, sat beside the trash bins and broken crates, and finally let it go. Tears that had been waiting for weeks. Rage she didn't have the energy to name. The feeling of being small, powerless, trapped in a life that kept asking her for more when she had nothing left to give. She buried her face in her hands and stayed like that, frozen in grief and panic. "Nalia?" The voice came out of nowhere. She turned, startled. Kalen. His silhouette was backlit by the late afternoon sun. His car parked a few feet away. He wasn't dressed like he came from a boardroom today. No tie, no polished coat, just jeans, a black shirt, and concern written all over his face. He took one look at her, her red eyes, her trembling shoulders, the stack of papers in her lap, and walked closer. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said gently. "Are you okay?" She laughed, once, dryly, "No." He sat down beside her, not touching her, not crowding her, just being there. "What happened?" She didn't answer. She just handed him the crumpled bill from her lap. He unfolded it, read the number at the bottom, and whistled under his breath. For a moment there was only silence. Then he looked at her and said, "How much do you need?" She blinked at him, still dazed. "What?" He held up the invoice. "To cover this. How much are you short?" She couldn't form words, just shook her head. "It's not your problem." He met her eyes. "That's not what I asked." She tried to brush it off. "I can't accept help like that." But he stayed quiet, and when he spoke again it wasn't rushed, it wasn't loud, just certain. "I'm not offering a loan. I'm not asking for anything in return. I just want to take care of it. You barely know me. I know enough." She folded her arms over her knees. "I feel like I'm drowning." "Then let me hold the rope for once," he said. There was a pause, a long one, and then, barely audible, she whispered, "Why?" Kalen exhaled. "Because you've never asked anyone to save you, and maybe you should have, a long time ago." She didn't agree, but she didn't argue either. He stood up and offered her a hand, not as a deal, not as pressure, just a hand. And this time she took it. They didn't talk much on the drive. She sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, still dazed, still unsure. When they arrived at the hotel, it wasn't the kind with chandeliers or red carpets. It was quiet, clean, discreet. He opened the door to the room and stepped aside, letting her walk in first. Inside was a simple king-sized bed, white linen sheets, a cushioned chair, and a soft yellow glow from the bedside lamp. No champagne, no assumptions, just space. "I'll take the chair," he said. She turned. "You don't have to." He shrugged. "I didn't come here for that." There was no script, no pressure, just stillness. She went into the bathroom, took the longest shower she'd had in weeks, cried behind the steam, let the hot water run over her skin till the tension began to release. When she came out, he was still in the chair, eyes closed, hands clasped, resting, but not asleep. She climbed into the bed fully clothed, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and whispered, "Thank you." He opened one eye and smiled. "You're welcome." They didn't kiss, they didn't touch, they just shared silence. But somehow that silence said everything. That night, Nalia slept for 10 uninterrupted hours, the first deep sleep in months. The next morning she woke to sunlight sneaking through the curtains. The space beside her was empty. Kalen was gone. No note, no lingering scent, no trace. just the receipt on the nightstand showing a hospital deposit had been made, paid in full. She stared at it for a long time. She didn't know what she felt. Relieved, grateful, confused, all of it. And something more. She touched her stomach without knowing why, and whispered to the empty room, "God, please let this mean something. What about you? Would you have accepted the offer? Comment yes or no below. And tell me why. Your answer might say more about you than you think." 3 weeks after the night with Kaylin, Nalia couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had changed. At first, she blamed the exhaustion. The shifts had been longer, the tension higher, and her appetite had all but disappeared. But then came the nausea. It wasn't the kind that came and went. It was steady, persistent, like her body was trying to tell her something and wouldn't stop until she listened. At the diner, she nearly fainted while carrying a tray of plates. Carla caught her elbow just in time. "Girl, you okay? You're white as flour." Nalia nodded weakly, probably just tired, but the worry didn't leave her face. That night she couldn't eat, even toast turned her stomach, and when the dizziness hit again the next morning, she knew this wasn't stress, this was different. She walked into the pharmacy wearing sunglasses and a hoodie, as if someone might recognize her. It took 10 minutes for her to grab the test, and another hour to find the courage to take it. She flipped it over. 2 lines. Her heart stopped. She checked the instructions again, then the stick, then the instructions. 2 lines. There was no room for misreading it. Pregnant. The word didn't feel real. She blinked, waited for the panic to rise, but instead there was stillness, just silence and the sound of her grandmother's breathing from the next room. She rested her hand on her lower abdomen. It didn't feel like anything had changed, but she already knew everything had. The next day she went to the clinic for confirmation. She sat in the corner, legs crossed, hands clenched in her lap. When the nurse brought her in, she barely spoke, just followed instructions, answered the questions. Let the tech do her job. She expected a yes or no. What she didn't expect was the technician's eyes widening slightly as she moved the probe. Miss Adair?" "Yes? I think you might want to sit up for this." Nalia furrowed her brow. "Why?" The woman turned the screen so she could see. "There are 3. Nalia stared at the grainy gray image. 3 what? 3 heartbeats. She blinked. "As in, babies?" The woman nodded. "Triplets." Nalia sat in the clinic bathroom for almost 20 minutes after the ultrasound. The lights buzzed overhead. Her hands trembled as she held the grainy printout in her lap. 3 heartbeats. She read the words over and over again, thinking they might change. That somehow, if she stared long enough, one of them might vanish. But all 3 were there, tiny, forming, alive. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She just felt the weight settle into her chest like a rock. Pregnancy had never been in her plans. And now she wasn't carrying 1 child, or 2, 3. She folded the paper slowly and tucked it into the back pocket of her jeans. When she stepped back into the hall, the nurse smiled gently, but Nalia didn't return it. There was nothing to smile about, not yet. The walk home felt longer than usual. Every sound felt louder. The city's usual rhythm, cars honking, kids yelling, wheels clacking over potholes, became a wall of noise. Her fingers brushed her lower stomach again and again as if touching it would change something. But there was nothing to feel, not yet, just the knowing, just the thought. 3 lives, dependent on me who can barely keep the lights on. At home, Miss Ellie was asleep in her chair, her hand resting gently on her favorite pillow. Nalia stood at the door for a full minute, watching her. She thought about her own childhood, her grandmother working doubles at the nursing home, coming home with swollen ankles but always managing to make dinner. She had done it alone. But could Nalia, with 3? That night she couldn't sleep. She laid on her back staring at the ceiling, hands folded across her stomach, mind racing. Kaylin. Should she tell him? The answer seemed obvious, and yet impossible. He had money, yes, influence, power. But that's exactly what scared her. Men like him didn't share. They took. They hired lawyers, drew up contracts, fought for custody with spreadsheets and affidavits. Would he want them? Would he want all of them? Would he see them as his? Would he see her as a mistake to manage? Not with this. She pulled the blanket tighter. No, they were hers. She would protect them, raise them, love them, even if it meant disappearing to do it. Nalia sat across from Janelle at their usual lunch table near the bus terminal. Half a sandwich sat untouched on her napkin. Janelle talked about work, rent hikes, and a new guy she met on the train. But Nalia wasn't listening. She nodded in the right places, smiled once, but her thoughts were somewhere else, inside her body, inside the lives forming without permission or plan. "You okay?" Janelle asked, finally noticing her blank stare. "Yeah, you sure? Just tired." Nalia said. That excuse always worked. Janelle didn't press. She picked up her drink and changed the subject. Nalia was grateful, because there was no way she could explain it. She hadn't told a soul. Each day that passed made the secret feel heavier. At work, she moved slower. Her appetite disappeared. The smell of frying oil made her nauseous, and even Carla started side-eyeing her when she excused herself for the third time in a shift. You good? I think it's just a bug, Nalia muttered. But it wasn't, and she knew it wouldn't stay hidden much longer. She bought prenatal vitamins at a corner store 2 neighborhoods over, cash only. And late at night, she would lie awake with her hand over her stomach, whispering things she couldn't say out loud to anyone else. I don't know how I'm going to do this. But I want you. I already love you, and I haven't even seen your faces yet. Some days she wanted to scream. Other days she just wanted to rest without waking up in panic. But always, there was that fear. If he finds out, he might try to take them. She didn't doubt that Galen was kind. He had helped her. He hadn't asked for anything. But his world was built on ownership, control, power. And she had learned over the years that money could change how people treated things once they became theirs. Would he try to help her by taking over? Would he send lawyers? Would he think he deserved them because he helped pay for their beginning? No, she couldn't risk that. She couldn't let anyone turn these babies into a negotiation, so she made her choice, say nothing, and begin again, far away from the spotlight he didn't even know he shined. Nalia had always been resourceful. She didn't panic, she planned. And now, she had to plan everything around 3 futures, not just her own. She started by cashing out what little she had in her savings account, barely enough to cover a deposit on a 1-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of Georgia. The kind of place with less noise, fewer people, and no eyes watching her every move. She called in favors. A cousin in Macon had a friend with a rental that didn't ask too many questions. No credit check. First and last month's rent up front, cash. She sold her grandmother's unused sewing machine on Facebook Marketplace, got rid of her second phone, returned a pair of unworn shoes. Piece by piece, she scraped together the money. She told her job she needed to leave to care for family. They didn't ask for a lot of detail. Just packed her last paycheck into an envelope and told her good luck. She hugged Carla tight. Didn't tell Janelle anything more than I need a break. And she didn't look back. The town she moved to was small enough to be quiet, but big enough to blend in. No one asked why she walked slow, or why she wore loose sweaters in the summer heat. People mostly minded their business. She rented a modest apartment on the edge of town, 2nd floor, a cracked window in the kitchen, a view of trees instead of traffic. The peace felt strange at first, but soon she needed it. Each morning, she walked a little slower. Each week, her belly grew a little rounder, and in the evenings, she sat on the porch with her feet up, a warm cup of tea in her hand, and her fingers tracing soft circles on her stomach. She picked out names, not all 3 at once, but one at a time, names that felt strong, names that sounded like love. She journaled, not for herself, but for them. Letters they'd one day read, full of thoughts she didn't know how to say aloud yet. I'm scared, but I'm not running. I don't know if I'll be enough, but I'll try. You were made from something quiet, something rare. The fear never fully left, but something else began to grow beside it. Courage, not loud, not showy, just steady. And that was enough. In the months that followed, Galen buried himself in work, product launches, investment calls, media panels, new hires, expansion. But none of it felt right, because something was missing, someone. He didn't go back to the diner. At first, it was intentional. He didn't want to come off as clingy or transactional. He figured she needed space. Then days turned into weeks, weeks into months. When he finally circled back to Willow Street Diner on a random Wednesday, the girl behind the counter looked at him strangely when he asked for Nalia. Oh, she's gone, the girl said. Left about 2 months ago. Quit out of nowhere. Gone? He thanked her, but didn't order anything. He just walked back to his car and sat with the engine off, hands clenched around the steering wheel. She hadn't told him anything. No goodbye, no number, no explanation. At first, he tried to reason it away. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. Maybe her grandmother had taken a turn. Maybe the move was a health thing, or financial, or both. But deep down, it gnawed at him. That night they spent together, it hadn't felt like a favor. It had felt honest, like something sacred had passed between them. Quiet, yes, but real. She had thanked him, not with words, but with the trust in her eyes, with the way she had fallen asleep near him, breath steady and unafraid. And now, she was just gone. Second, his assistant noticed a shift in him. He skipped social events, took more meetings by phone, canceled 2 board dinners in a row. When someone cracked a joke about him being off the market, he didn't even respond, because even if he couldn't say it out loud, even if it didn't make sense, part of him still hoped she'd walk through a door somewhere and say, "I didn't disappear, I was just scared." But silence was the only answer he got. So he went back to working, and wondering, and waiting. By the 7th month, Nalia couldn't pretend anymore, not to herself, not to her reflection. Her belly was round and high. Her back ached every time she stood for too long. The babies moved constantly now, shifting, stretching, reminding her that their lives were no longer theoretical. They were real, almost here. She talked to them every morning, sometimes out loud, sometimes in thought. "Hold on just a little longer, okay? Mommy's figuring it out. I'm scared too, but we're going to be all right." The nursery was simple. 3 second-hand cribs, a rocking chair with a loose leg, and walls she painted by hand in soft yellow, even when her feet swelled and her arms ached. She sewed little name tags and clipped them to each crib. No names yet, just placeholders, baby A, baby B, baby C. It grounded her, made it feel like she was preparing, not running. But the secret, it grew heavier with every heartbeat. What would she say when they were old enough to ask? Who would she point to when they asked, "Where's our dad?" Would she lie? Or would she tell them that their father once helped save their great-grandmother's life and disappeared without even knowing he'd left them behind? That didn't feel fair. Not to them, not to him. But she wasn't ready to share them either. They hadn't been a couple. There had been no promises, no foundation. And if she brought him in now, he'd take over. She knew it. Her world had been quiet these past months. Small, yes. But it belonged to her. Adding him would change everything. Was she keeping them safe, or was she robbing them of something? That question haunted her. She'd wake at 3 a.m., hand on her belly, eyes burning in the dark. Not from pain, from guilt. And yet, she stayed silent, because silence felt safer than surrender. She drafted a letter once, to him, just in case something happened during labor. She never signed it. She folded it and slid it behind the ultrasound photo, just in case. The cramp hit her just after midnight. At first, Nalia thought it was gas. A muscle spasm. Maybe too much walking that day. She tried to ignore it, rolled onto her side, breathed through it like the nurse at the clinic had taught her. But when the second one came, stronger, tighter, sharper, she sat up, clutching her belly. Not now. It was too soon. She was only 32 weeks. Still had over a month to go. The cramping didn't wait. By the time she reached the hospital, she was sweating and pale, barely able to explain what was happening. They rushed her into triage. Her blood pressure was high. Her contractions were close. The nurse didn't mince words. "We need to prep you for delivery. They're not waiting. It all happened fast." The IV drip, the monitor cords, the buzz of scrubs and machines and surgical tools. She barely had time to panic. But the fear was there, in her throat, her bones, her lungs. 3 tiny lives not ready yet, about to arrive whether she was or not. The bright lights of the operating room blurred. A mask was fitted over her face. She whispered something, but no one heard. Not until her voice cracked through the hum of urgency. And then everything went black. When she woke, the lights were dim. Her arms numb. She reached instinctively for her belly, but it was flat, hollow. A nurse leaned over her. "You did great, sweetheart. They're in NICU, stable, breathing on their own." Tears slipped from Nalia's eyes before she could even nod. She whispered, "All 3?" The nurse smiled. All 3. The recovery room was cold, but for the first time in months her heart was warm. She had done it. They had made it. 3 tiny humans now existed because she had chosen to protect them, fiercely, silently, completely. She didn't think of Kaylin until the next afternoon, when she looked at their hospital bracelets, when she saw the line marked Father, Unknown. That word hit different now. It wasn't an insult, it was a truth. A placeholder, one she had chosen. She held her son in her arms, baby B, and kissed the soft fuzz on his head. Maybe, but not yet. Not until she knew for sure she wasn't opening the door to control. Because what these babies needed more than anything was peace. And so did she. 3 weeks after her early delivery, Nalia stood at the window of her new apartment in quiet amazement. Not because of the view, it was just trees and streetlights, but because of how still it all was. No shouting neighbors, no sirens, no diner alarms or city stress humming through the walls. Just soft wind, crickets, the occasional bark of a dog somewhere down the block. She wrapped her robe tighter and stepped barefoot onto the small back porch, cup of warm milk in hand, and exhaled. This was what she'd wanted, what she had needed. Peace. The town had welcomed her without asking much. The landlord, a gray-bearded man with thick glasses, helped carry her bags in without so much as a glance at her swollen postpartum belly. It was the kind of town where people kept their own business and respected yours, perfect for starting over. Inside, her apartment was small but warm. White curtains swayed gently from the open windows. Potted plants lined the windowsill, gifts from the older woman across the hall. A bassinet stood in the corner of her room. Beside it, 2 identical cradles waited. Every wall was bare except for one, a hand-drawn calendar she used to track feeding times and diaper changes. Above that calendar, pinned delicately, were 3 hospital wristbands. The babies were adjusting. Small cries, round cheeks, restless legs. Their names were handwritten on post-its above their cribs for the nurses before discharge, still there now. Luca, Micah, Naomi. She chose them one by one, not for how they sounded, but for how they felt. Luca meant bringer of light. Micah meant who was like God. Naomi, her middle name, meant gentle and pleasant. They fit. Every night after the last feeding, Nalia sat down at the small wooden table in her kitchen and wrote. Not in a journal, but on scraps of lined paper she folded neatly into a shoebox marked, for them, letters, honest ones, sometimes happy, sometimes scared, sometimes just thoughts from a tired mother trying her best. You kicked so much tonight, Naomi, I couldn't even sit. I didn't mind. Luca cried for an hour straight. I cried with you, then we both slept. Micah, today you smiled. It was probably gas, but I needed it. Thank you. She didn't have anyone to read them to yet. But one day she would, because she wanted her children to know they were never a burden, even when the world said otherwise. And in that quiet kitchen, with the hum of the fridge and the softness of moonlight pooling on the floor, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Whole, not because everything was perfect, but because she had chosen this, and even when it was hard, it felt right. Can you relate to choosing peace over wealth? Hit that like button if you've ever had to walk away from comfort to protect your heart. The days settled into rhythm. Feed, change, rock, repeat. Morning sun spilled through the east-facing windows, casting gold onto soft blankets and tiny toes. The babies cooed more now, their eyes tracking her when she moved around the room. It wasn't glamorous. There were no visits from friends, no bouquet deliveries, no congratulatory dinners. But there was warmth. The kind that wrapped around her when Luca gripped her pinky finger in his sleep. The kind that made her smile when Naomi's hiccups echoed through the apartment like tiny drum beats. The kind that reminded her, this is the life I chose. She made a ritual of journaling now. Each night, once all 3 were down and the apartment fell into silence, she'd sit on the floor beside their cribs and write letters by hand. One for each baby, even if it was just a line or 2. Micah, you curled your fingers around the spoon today. You didn't even want food. You just liked the sound it made. I love your curiosity. Luca, I caught you staring at the ceiling for 10 minutes. What were you thinking? The world you'll explore someday. Naomi, your laugh, my God, your laugh, it saved me this morning. They weren't just letters, they were roots. She didn't have much in this new life. No partner, no big family, no inheritance. But she was building something with words. A map for them to find her one day, when they wondered how it all started. But peace was strange. Even when it wrapped around her like a blanket, she could feel the cold edge of doubt pressed against her back. What if something went wrong? What if they needed more than she could give? She had enough for now. Diapers, formula, rent paid for 2 months. But what about after? What if one of them got sick? What if she got sick? She didn't let the fear consume her, but she couldn't ignore it either. Some nights, after putting the letters away, she stood at the window and watched the street. She'd imagine Kalen, what he'd say if he saw them. Would he feel anger, shock, joy? Would he see these babies as his responsibility, or a reminder of a choice she made without him? She told herself it didn't matter, that she'd done the right thing. But sometimes, when Luca wailed for no reason, and Naomi spit up all over the crib, and Micah refused to sleep, she wished she had someone to lean on, someone who didn't need a long explanation to understand why she was tired beyond words, someone who had been there that night, and yet, she never picked up the phone, because part of her still believed love shouldn't be forced, and if he hadn't come looking, maybe he had already moved on. By the 3rd month, Nalia stopped second-guessing herself so much. She still had her doubts, still got tired, still cried in the bathroom when all 3 babies lost it at once. But she wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had been replaced with something slower, steadier, strength, not the kind that shouted, not the kind that flexed, but the kind that stayed. The babies were growing. Luca had the loudest cry, but also the widest smile. Micah always took longer to settle but slept longer once he did. Naomi was alert, always watching, as if memorizing the room. Nalia learned their rhythms. She could tell who needed what just by the way they whimpered. which cry meant hunger, which one meant gas, which meant I just want to be held. The apartment was still small, but it no longer felt like a temporary space. It felt like home. She rearranged the living room so there was more floor space for tummy time and tiny mats. The coffee table became a diaper station. Baby bottles lined the dish rack like soldiers after a long march. She hung up 3 Polaroids on the wall, one for each baby in her arms the day they left the NICU. No fancy frames, just tape. But it meant everything. One afternoon, she took the babies outside for the first time. 3 strollers lashed together with a stubborn heart and a borrowed connector from the neighbor. The wheels squeaked down the ramp, but the air was fresh and the sky was clear. She pushed them slowly down the sidewalk, past neighbors' sweeping porches and watering plants. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled and didn't fake it. A little girl on a scooter pointed and said, "Triplets?" Nalia nodded. The girl's eyes widened. "Cool," and zipped away. Back inside, as she changed diapers and heated formula, a song came on the old radio she kept on top of the fridge. One of her grandma's favorites. Soft keys and mellow strings. She hummed along, rocking Naomi on her hip, and let herself dance just a little. A sway, a step, a bounce, her curls loose, her robe hanging open over leggings and a spit-stained tank top. She was living. That night she wrote a letter to herself, not to the babies, to the woman who had carried them alone, moved cities, built safety from scratch. You did something people only talk about. You left what you knew for what you deserved. You gave up help to protect peace. You walked away from comfort to keep your soul intact. You chose love, even when it meant choosing it by yourself. She folded the note and taped it to the fridge, because even strong women need to remember why they chose hard things. The babies were 6 months old when Naomi reached for the rattle on her own. It was a small thing, barely a moment, but it stopped Nalia in her tracks. She had been folding laundry, half asleep on her feet, and then suddenly her daughter had reached with focus, with intention. That was new, and somehow that made everything feel more real again. They were growing. Every day they became more themselves, more expressive, more aware. Luca giggled when she made faces. Micah hated naps but loved story time. Naomi, ever her watcher, seemed to absorb the world with quiet intelligence. And with each new milestone came a soft ache in Nalia's chest. Because every laugh, every hiccup, every small victory, they all brought the same whisper, "He doesn't know." Sometimes she pictured what Kalen might do if he found out. Would he be shocked, or would he be grateful? She had no idea. And that unknown sat in her chest like a stone. She had Googled his name once, just once. Typed Kalen Adaro into her phone and watched as the screen filled with articles. Tech Investor of the Year, guest speaker at a university, spotted courtside at a Hawks game, not one line about a baby, or 3. She hadn't looked again. It felt too dangerous. Not because he was dangerous, but because part of her still felt something for him. At night, when all 3 were asleep and the apartment was dark except for the kitchen light, she'd sit with a cup of warm tea and stare at her old phone. The one she kept tucked in a drawer. The one that still had his number in it. She hadn't blocked him, hadn't deleted it, hadn't changed hers either. He had never texted, never called. Maybe he didn't even realize she was gone. Maybe that night hadn't meant anything to him. Or maybe it had. Maybe he was waiting for her to reach out first, to make the first move. But how do you call someone and say, "Surprise, you're a father, ×3. You don't. Not unless you know he'll hear you with his heart and not just his wallet." And she wasn't sure of that. Not yet. So she kept loving her babies, kept pouring herself into routines and lullabies and bedtime kisses, and she let the questions hang in the air like steam from the tea. Questions without answers. Answers without guarantees. Spring settled gently over the town, and with it came blooming jasmine outside Nalia's window and soft warmth on the sidewalk as she pushed the stroller trio down to the small park each afternoon. There was a routine now. Breakfast bottles at 7, morning nap at 9, a walk at noon, story time before the second nap. Her world had narrowed into predictable pockets, but within those pockets she had carved out something sacred, stability. It wasn't glamorous. There were no big announcements, no photo ops, just peace and soft baby giggles and quiet strength. The woman she used to be, the one folding napkins in a diner, chasing tips, checking on her grandmother between shifts, felt like someone else now. She didn't feel lost anymore. She felt planted, not hiding, protecting. That distinction mattered more than anyone realized. She didn't run away from Kalen, not because she hated him, not because she wanted revenge, but because she couldn't risk her children becoming a headline, a fight, a case number. She remembered what it was like being raised by someone who had to protect you from the world instead of show it to you. She didn't want that for them. The letters to her children became more thoughtful, less about moments, more about meaning. I hope you never mistake distance for indifference. I chose to keep you safe first. I pray you understand that someday, when you ask why your father wasn't there from the start, I'll tell you the truth, all of it, because I owe you that. But I won't paint him as a villain. He wasn't. He just didn't know. And I wasn't ready. She sealed each letter carefully and returned them to the shoebox. Someday they would be old enough to read, to feel it for themselves. A neighbor offered to babysit one afternoon while she walked alone for the first time in months. She didn't go far, just down the block, through the row of sycamores, past the rusted fence where wildflowers grew. She sat on a bench and let the breeze brush against her skin. And for the first time in a long time, she thought about hope, not as a wish, but as a plan. A small spark in the quiet. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if Kaylin would ever find out, but she knew this. When he did, it would be on her terms, not from a stranger, not from a headline, not in a courtroom. Because she wasn't just a mother now, she was a protector, a guide, a woman who had learned how to build a life out of patience, prayer, and long nights. And when the moment came, if it came, she would be ready. The gala hall glittered with soft lighting and champagne voices. Silk gowns swept the marble floor. Tuxedos moved through the crowd like chess pieces. A string quartet played something elegant but forgettable. Kaylin Adero stood near the edge of the room, holding a glass of still water, scanning the crowd with a practiced detachment. He hated events like this. Too much praise, too many polished hands wanting something. But his foundation was sponsoring the evening. So he showed up, said the right words, shook the right hands, and then slipped into the background. That's when he saw her. At first, he thought it was his mind playing tricks, a profile, a flash of curls, the tilt of her chin. But when she turned, it was Nalia, no doubt. She looked different, not drastically, but different enough to make his breath stop. Her hair was longer. She wore a pale blue dress that hugged her figure with quiet strength. One arm cradled a baby, chubby-cheeked, wide-eyed. Two others were nearby in a stroller, fussing quietly. His heart slammed against his ribs. Time paused. He forgot how to breathe. He took one step forward, then another. She hadn't seen him yet. Too focused on settling the pacifier into one baby's mouth while gently bouncing the other. Then she looked up. Their eyes met. Nalia froze, her mouth opened slightly, as if trying to form a word or an excuse. But no sound came out. The distance between them melted under the weight of the moment. Kaylin stepped closer, carefully, slowly, not like a man demanding something, but like someone approaching a door he wasn't sure he was welcome to knock on. "You weren't going to tell me?" he said quietly, not loud enough to draw attention, but clear enough to cut straight through the music. Nalia's jaw tightened. She adjusted Naomi on her hip and straightened her shoulders. "I didn't think I had to." Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was guarded. Firm. He glanced at the babies, back at her. How old are they? 6 months? A beat. He did the math. His throat tightened. Triplets? She nodded once. The answer was simple. But the meaning behind it was anything but. The music swelled. Glasses clinked. But between them it was silent. Finally he whispered, "Are they mine?" "Do you really have to ask?" Kaylin didn't flinch. He just exhaled, long and low, not out of frustration, but out of heartbreak. Kaylin blinked slowly, processing the weight of her answer. 3 babies. His. He looked again, not just at the children, but at her. The circles under her eyes, the tired, careful stance of a woman who had carried everything on her own. There was no room for denial. This wasn't a surprise. It was a revelation, one she had chosen to carry alone. "Why?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Nalia didn't break eye contact, but her hand shifted subtly, tightening around the stroller handle, grounding herself. "I was protecting them?" "From me? From the noise that follows you? From becoming names on some family trust or faces in tabloids?" Her voice didn't shake, but something behind it did. Kaylin stepped closer, careful not to invade her space. "I never would have let that happen." "You don't get to say that," she snapped gently. "You weren't there." The words weren't loud, but they landed like thunder. He nodded slowly. "You're right." They stood in silence for a moment as one of the babies let out a small, tired whimper. She reached down and adjusted a pacifier without breaking the tension between them. "I wasn't hiding out of anger," she said. "I just couldn't let them be a decision made over conference calls and custody papers." "I never would have." "But you could have," she interrupted quietly. "And I couldn't take that chance." He looked at her like a man trying to remember how to speak. His world was built on certainties, control, strategy, but here he had none. All he had was this moment, raw, unplanned. "Did you ever think about calling?" he asked. Nalia glanced down at Naomi in her arms, then back up. That hit harder than he expected. Then why didn't you? Because wanting you isn't the same as trusting you. That line sliced through the polished evening like a blade. It wasn't cruel. And that honesty held more pain than venom ever could. He looked down at his hands. "I should have come back to the diner." She didn't say anything. He lifted his eyes again. "I thought you left because you weren't interested." "I left," she said, "because I was already pregnant, and I needed time to figure out what was mine, before the world tried to take it from me." Kalen's face softened. The ache behind his eyes wasn't guilt. It was grief. Grief for time lost. For moments he never got to witness. First kicks, first cries. The first time they opened their eyes and looked around for comfort. He'd missed all of it, and not because he walked away, but because he never knew. "I don't want to take them from you," he said suddenly. "I don't want headlines or contracts. I just want to know them. However you'll let me." That stopped her, the way he said them, like someone who knew he didn't deserve her trust yet, but wanted to earn it anyway. Not yet. The music behind them faded into a slow instrumental. The baby stirred, and the world spun on, unaware that something seismic had just shifted. A murmur started somewhere near the bar. It wasn't loud, just a whisper passed between sharply dressed guests who noticed something, or someone off script. 3 infants at a black tie event, and a woman who clearly didn't match the usual donor profile? Kalen's name was mentioned once, then twice. People started connecting dots. And soon eyes were drifting toward him and Nalia like magnets to tension. He noticed it before she did. The shift in posture, the subtle turning of heads. The woman near the hors d'oeuvres whispering behind a manicured hand. Nalia followed his gaze and immediately stiffened. "I shouldn't have come," she murmured. "I was invited by the hospital. They didn't tell me you'd be here." "You didn't do anything wrong," Kalen said firmly. But she was already backing away, trying to rock Naomi back into calm while adjusting the stroller, searching for the nearest exit with her eyes. "You don't owe these people anything," he added, stepping slightly in front of her, shielding her from view. She gave him a look, sharp and weary. "I owe my children safety." The word safety wasn't dramatic in her mouth. It was sacred. Across the room, one of Kalen's board members caught his eye, an older man with silver cufflinks and too much pride in his handshake. The man started toward them. Nalia caught the movement. "I need to go," she whispered. "Nalia, no. This isn't your world anymore. It's mine, and I can't let it become a circus." Before he could argue, she started pushing the stroller toward the side door, one arm gently bouncing Naomi on her shoulder. A photographer snapped a shot before the security team noticed. The flash wasn't loud, but it cracked something inside him. This wasn't a reunion. This was a storm, and she was walking straight into the wind again alone. Kalen didn't chase her. Not yet. He stood still, jaw clenched, as the board member arrived and leaned in with a smirk that masked something sharper. "Quite the surprise guest," the man said, eyes drifting to the side door. "Friend of yours?" Kalen looked at him with zero amusement. "Leave it alone." The older man raised an eyebrow. "You sure? You know how people talk. I said leave it alone." That was the end of it. But inside, something deeper had settled. Not anger, something else. A fire of protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. He left the gala 15 minutes later. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. Didn't shake another hand. Didn't offer any closing remarks to the press. He just left, with one image etched in his mind, Nalia disappearing out that side door, cradling the baby he hadn't even known existed. The door to her apartment clicked shut with a soft thud. Nalia stood just inside, one hand still on the knob, the other resting on Naomi's back as the baby dozed against her shoulder. She didn't move, didn't cry, didn't speak. She just stood there, the silence around her louder than the gala ever was. The babies had fallen asleep on the ride home, tucked into their car seats like tiny kings and queen, breathing softly in sync, unaware of the storm that had nearly unfolded in their name. Nalia laid them down gently in their cribs, adjusting blankets, brushing her fingers over their foreheads. Safe. That was the only word that mattered now. But when the apartment was finally still, and the clock edged toward midnight, she sat at the kitchen table with a pen in her hand and an old letter from the shoebox in front of her. Except this time, the letter wasn't to the babies. It was to him. She didn't write it on impulse. She'd started a dozen times over the months, on napkins, receipt backs, scrap paper, but none of it stuck. This time felt different. She placed the pen to paper, heart in her throat. "Kalen, I don't know if you're angry, or confused, or hurt. Maybe you feel all of it. I want you to know this wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was survival. You met me at the edge of a cliff, one night where I had nothing left to give. You offered help without asking for anything in return, but I still gave you something. And what came from that night were 3 people who changed everything. They are beautiful, they are loud, they are healthy, and they are mine, but not just mine. I don't know how to share them with you without giving up the calm I built. I don't know if you can love them without needing to control where their feet land. But I saw your face tonight, and maybe I saw something else too. Something softer than power, something quieter than legacy. Maybe love, maybe not for me, but maybe for them. I don't know how this ends, but if you meant what you said, if you don't want to fight me, if you just want to know them, then maybe we can start from that. She stopped writing, folded the letter once, then twice. She stared at the envelope and didn't seal it. Instead, she slid it into the drawer next to the baby bottles, next to the measuring spoons, next to the pacifiers, a quiet maybe, waiting for the right moment. 3 days passed. Nalia didn't hear from him. No knock at the door. No message, no flowers, no lawyer's letter, just silence. She told herself that was good, that she wanted that peace was being preserved. But every night, when the apartment was quiet and the baby's finally asleep, she found her eyes drifting toward the drawer. The one with the letter, the one she still hadn't sealed. It was day 4 when the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. She almost didn't answer. Naomi was teething. Luca was mid-nap. Micah had just spilled formula across the floor, but something in her chest tugged. She opened it slowly. There he was, no cameras, no car behind him. No polished suit, just jeans, a plain jacket, and a quiet look in his eyes that held more questions than confidence. He didn't say anything right away. He just held out a box, medium size, wrapped with brown paper and no label. She stared at it. What is this? Not a bribe, he said quickly. Nalia raised an eyebrow. I didn't say it was... He cracked the smallest smile. You were thinking it. She took the box, opened it slowly. Inside were 3 small stuffed animals, hand-sewn bears, each one with a different colored ribbon. Beside them, 3 worn paperback books. Classic children's stories. Not of him, not of her, but of a nursery, soft blue walls, a rocking chair, 3 tiny cribs. She looked up. He shrugged gently. I had it done, just in case. Her voice was soft. You thought I'd let them come live with you? No, he said honestly. I thought, if one day you wanted to visit, they should have something waiting, something that said, I was ready. Nalia's fingers tightened around the edge of the box. For the first time in months, she didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. Instead, she stepped aside and let him in. He walked in like a man entering sacred ground, shoes off, voice low, eyes everywhere, but not to judge, just to take it all in. He stopped when he saw them, all 3, still dozing, chests rising and falling in sync. He crouched beside the crib and stayed there for a long time. Nalia sat nearby, on the couch, arms crossed, heartbeat fast. You don't have to say anything, he said softly. I just wanted to meet them, and let you see me meet them. She watched him gently reach out and rest a hand near Luca's arm, close but not touching. The gesture of a man trying to earn his place. That moment said more than any lawyer's letter ever could, more than any apology or check or promise. It was presence, and presence, she realized, was all she'd ever really wanted. The first headline hit the internet just after sunrise. Tech mogul Kayla Nadero father to secret triplets? Nalia didn't see it right away. She was too busy warming bottles and wiping oatmeal off Micah's chin to check her phone. But the notifications came anyway. Buzzes from old friends, missed calls from unfamiliar numbers, a message from her landlord asking if everything was okay. By noon, it was everywhere. Photos from the fundraiser were leaked, her in that pale blue dress holding Naomi. Kaylin beside her, looking stunned. Someone had zoomed in on the stroller, 3 visible pacifiers. Another photo had captured him crouching beside the crib display, watching the babies with unmistakable tenderness. Nalia's breath left her body when she saw it. This wasn't a story. This was a wildfire. One she hadn't started, one she couldn't stop. She paced the kitchen, heart pounding, every window in the apartment suddenly feeling like glass she could be watched through. She opened the drawer. The letter to Kaylin was still there, still unsealed. Too late now. The text got worse, some sympathetic, some cruel. One from a reporter asking for an exclusive to tell her side. Another claiming to be from a mother's advocacy group who only wanted to help navigate the press storm. She didn't answer any of them. Then came the knock at the door. She froze. Not a neighbor's knock. Not friendly. Measured, calm, confident. She looked through the peephole and saw 2 men in suits she didn't open. A note slid beneath the door 10 seconds later. She picked it up with trembling fingers. Official inquiry regarding the legal status of Mr. Adero's parental rights. Counsel is prepared to initiate proceedings for shared custody should an agreement not be reached. It was from a law firm, one she recognized from Kaylin's public portfolio. Her vision blurred. She sat down hard on the floor. When the babies cried moments later, she didn't respond right away. She couldn't. She just sat there, letter in her lap, the buzz of her phone still going, the weight of a world she didn't ask for crashing in. At the same time, Kaylin stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown office, staring out at the skyline with his jaw locked tight. He hadn't authorized anything. He'd made that clear. But the board had found out. So had the PR team. And they didn't care about his personal feelings. They cared about stability. Image. Shareholder confidence. So, like clockwork, they acted. Sent the lawyers. Prepared the statements. Spun it as concern, not control. But he saw it for what it was. Damage control. And it gutted him. His phone rang. He didn't answer. His assistant knocked. He ignored it. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, tired, suit still perfect, eyes burning. He didn't feel powerful. He felt like a stranger in his own life. Meanwhile, the gossip sites had a field day. Diner Girl stuns tech world. Is Adero fit to parent? Sources say she vanished after a single night. Why didn't he know sooner? Each headline more invasive than the last. None of them had the truth. None of them knew about the night outside the diner. The grief behind her strength. The gentleness in their single, wordless embrace. To them it was scandal. To her, it had been survival. And now survival was harder than ever. Nalia closed the curtains and held all 3 of her babies close. Not out of fear, out of defiance. She would not be painted into a narrative that didn't belong to her. The courthouse wasn't intimidating from the outside. Just red brick, glass doors, a flag out front. But inside it felt like everything Nalia had fought to protect was on the line. She sat in the family court reception area, the twins in a double stroller, Naomi on her lap. Her lawyer, pro bono through a women's legal aid organization, flipped through the paperwork with calm fingers and a patient voice. You're doing this because you need a record of your intent, she reminded her. Even if he never fights you, even if he loves them, this protects your right to decide what's best for your children, legally and clearly. Nalia nodded. She hadn't slept the night before. Her hands trembled when she signed the first document. But by the time she signed the third one, they were steady. Petition for sole, legal, and physical custody. It wasn't an attack. It was a line in the sand, not to keep him out, but to keep chaos out, to create a boundary that no press release, no board member, and no news headline could cross. After the filing, she sat in her car, key in the ignition, but didn't start it. She watched the slow drift of leaves across the hood, and the distant blur of parents walking in and out with strollers, car seats, folded paperwork under their arms. Everyone was trying to do the right thing. So was she. The next day, her name hit court records, and that was enough for the press to run the next headline. Mother of Kaylin Adero's children files for full custody. No support requested. Online comments erupted. She's using the kids to get sympathy. She's smart. Look at what happened to other women like her. Why isn't he fighting back? She probably hid them on purpose. She didn't respond. She didn't explain. Her silence was not weakness. It was her armor. But behind that silence, a heart breaking. Not because she filed, but because she had to. Because the world didn't let stories like hers unfold quietly. Kaylin sat in his condo, the blinds drawn, lights off, the city glowing in soft blurs beyond the window. His phone buzzed again. He didn't check it. He already knew what the message would say. Another article, another opinion, another headline that didn't care about the truth, only the chaos. What stung most wasn't the press. It wasn't the silence from Nalia. It was the legal filing, full custody, no child support, no shared parenting. She hadn't even asked him to co-sign a check. She'd asked the court to leave him out completely. He had reread the documents 3 times, just to make sure he understood them right. And still, it hit like a punch to the gut. He didn't call his lawyers. Didn't order a rebuttal. Didn't try to fix it. Because somewhere deep down, he knew she was doing what she thought she had to do, and he couldn't blame her. Not after what his name had done. Not after what his people had done. He fired the legal team that had sent the papers to her without his consent. He released a brief public statement to the press. I ask for privacy and respect on behalf of all parties. No further comments will be made. Then he disappeared from view. No interviews. No explanations. He spent those weeks in silence, alone in the apartment that once made him feel untouchable. Now it felt hollow. Not because it was empty, but because it had never been full to begin with. The nursery he'd built in his house on the outskirts of the city sat untouched, 3 plush bears still sitting on the shelf facing the window. Sometimes he went in and stood by the door. Not for long, just enough to feel the ache of what wasn't there. He remembered the first time he saw them, each of them, at the fundraiser, the curve of Luca's cheek, Naomi's blinking stare, Micah's restless feet. He hadn't even held them. Not yet, but they were already a part of him. And now? Now he couldn't call, couldn't visit. Couldn't send a letter without risking escalation. He couldn't be present, because presence wasn't always about desire. Sometimes it was about permission, and she hadn't given it. He scrolled through photos on his phone one night, thumb resting on an image from the gala. Not one of Nalia. Just a blurry shot he had snapped quietly of the babies in the stroller when she wasn't looking. He didn't know why he took it. Now he was grateful he had. The media moved on after 2 weeks. A scandal in the music world took center stage. A major tech crash shifted market attention. His name slowly faded from the top headlines, but the ache didn't. He told his assistant to cancel all upcoming social functions, paused a merger deal, took calls only when required. The world spun without him, and he let it. Because sometimes retreat isn't defeat, it's space. Space to let wounds breathe. Space to show you're not trying to own something that never belonged to you without invitation. In the quiet, he hoped she'd see that, not as silence, but as respect. This is where it gets personal. Nalia didn't ask for child support. She didn't drag him through court for money or headlines. She filed for custody quietly, not out of revenge but protection. And Kalen? He didn't fight her. He didn't send press releases. He just backed away, out of love, not fear. But love doesn't always look the same on both sides of the door. So now we ask you, whose side are you on? Was Nalia right to keep her distance? To put safety above shared parenting? Or did Kalen deserve a chance to be a father the moment he found out? Type your answer in the comments. Team Nalia if you believe she was right to protect her peace, even if it meant raising the kids alone. Team Kalen if you think he deserved more time, more access, more trust, even if the system failed both of them. Either way, this is a real one. So hit like if you felt anything reading this part. And subscribe for the rest of the story. The first time he returned, it wasn't dramatic. There was no knock at midnight, no dramatic confession, no grand gesture in the rain. It was Tuesday, and he showed up on her porch with his jacket sleeves rolled and a paper bag in his hand. Inside it, banana muffins, fresh, still warm. Nalia opened the door slowly, cautiously. She had Naomi on her hip, who immediately squirmed at the scent. He looked different. No tailored suit, no cologne, no presence that screamed corporate power. Just jeans, sneakers, a hoodie that looked lived in. "Hi," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "You're not supposed to be here." "I know." She didn't move. He didn't push. "I didn't come to talk about custody, or make things complicated. I made these. For them." He held the bag up. She didn't reach for it, but Naomi did. Tiny fingers tugged at the edge like the bag belonged to her. Nalia's walls didn't drop, but she opened the screen door wider. 5 minutes, she muttered. He stepped in. The apartment smelled like formula and lavender. He didn't look around, didn't comment on the space, just followed her quietly into the kitchen and placed the bag on the counter. Micah was fussing in his crib. Luca had a sock halfway off, the kind of mild chaos that came with raising 3 tiny humans under one roof. He didn't ask questions. He just stepped forward, gently fixed Luca's sock, found a pacifier on the floor and rinsed it in the sink, wiped a spill from the high chair without being told. 5 minutes turned into 20. But he didn't overstay. Before leaving, he crouched beside the playpen and whispered, "I'll be back, if you'll let me." He didn't ask to hold anyone, didn't overstep, didn't explain the muffins. He just left. And for the first time in weeks, Nalia stood at the door after it closed, and didn't feel angry, just unsure. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and tired parents. Nalia rocked Naomi gently while Luca chewed on the corner of a board book. Micah was mid-meltdown, halfway through a tantrum, halfway off her lap. She was sweating through her t-shirt. The receptionist called out, "Miss Banks, room 3, and she gathered her bags, balancing all 3 babies like she was used to doing everything with 2 hands that should have been 4. That's when the nurse held the door and said, "Oh, your husband's already in the room." Nalia froze. "Excuse me?" The nurse blinked. Tall, quiet man, said he was family. Nalia's heart skipped. She stepped into room 3. Kalen was sitting in the tiny plastic chair beside the wall, holding a diaper bag. No camera crew, no suit, just him. He stood instantly. "Hey, I called earlier, thought maybe I could tag along. No agenda." Naomi reached for him without hesitation. Nalia hesitated. But Naomi didn't. Kaylin lifted her gently, pressing his nose to her forehead like it was the most natural thing in the world. The pediatrician came in with a smile, greeted them both, started running through the usual checkups. Weight, height, developmental questions. Kaylin answered a few, carefully. Let Nalia lead. He didn't pretend to know everything, he just paid attention. When Luca had a diaper blowout mid-checkup, Nalia sighed, ready to spring into action. But Kaylin stood. I got this one. You sure? She asked. He was already unzipping the bag. In under 3 minutes he had Luca clean, dry, and back in socks. No fuss, no mess. The pediatrician blinked. You've done this before? No, he smiled. Just watched a lot of YouTube. On the way out, Nalia didn't speak at first. Kaylin followed her to the car, helping lift Micah's seat into the back. You didn't have to show up like that, she said finally. I know. Most men would have called. I'm not most men, he replied simply. She didn't smile. But she didn't shut the door on him either. That night, when all 3 babies were down and snoring, she sat at the kitchen table and stared at a piece of blank paper. Not a letter, just a note. Thanks for showing up today. You didn't make it worse. She folded it, but she didn't throw it away either. It was Saturday morning when he knocked again. This time, he held a small toolbox in one hand and a plastic bag in the other. What's that? Nalia asked, holding the door halfway open. Screws. You mentioned the crib was wobbly. She frowned. I didn't mention it to you. You did, he said softly, 2 weeks ago, when you were half asleep and trying to put Micah down. You were muttering. He smiled just a little. She didn't return it, but she let him in. The crib in the nursery had started to lean ever so slightly to one side, not dangerously, but enough that she'd been stuffing a folded burp cloth under one leg to even it out. Kaylin got to work without a word. He laid a towel down, checked the joints, replaced stripped screws with fresh ones, even tightened the mobile. He didn't ask for a thank you. Meanwhile, Nalia stood nearby, arms folded, watching him. It was strange, seeing him so quiet, so capable in silence. The man who once commanded meetings with a glance now sat cross-legged on the floor, twisting a bolt for her babies. And when Naomi toddled over with a toy block, he stopped mid-turn just to hand it back gently. Later that afternoon, he asked, Do they like the park? She blinked. Which one? The one 2 blocks down, near the duck pond. They've never been. His brow lifted. Let's change that. Going outside with him still felt risky. But the babies needed sun, and she needed a walk. So they packed a bag, loaded the triple stroller, and walked. At the pond, Kaylin brought out a small bag of crushed crackers. Micah squealed the second a duck waddled over. Luca clapped. Naomi stared like it was a dream. He knelt beside them, showing them how to toss crumbs gently. Not too much, not too loud, just enough. 3 toddlers feeding ducks on a sunny afternoon. No bodyguards, no photographers, just him, just them. After a while, Nalia sat on a nearby bench, and for the first time in a long time, she just watched, not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with the smallest flicker of warmth. Because this wasn't a performance. He wasn't trying to win her. He was just there, present, not perfect, just showing up. The living room was quiet except for the soft, uneven breaths of 3 toddlers asleep in their cribs. Naomi had fallen asleep with her hand wrapped around Kaylin's finger. Luca had demanded 3 stories. Micah had cried for no reason, then passed out mid-sniffle. Nalia sat on the couch, a baby monitor on the coffee table, and a mug of lukewarm tea in her hands. She didn't say anything when Kaylin dropped into the seat beside her. She didn't shift away either. For a long time they just sat. He glanced over. I can head out. You could, she replied. Not cold, just honest. But she didn't move to open the door, and he didn't move to leave. The room wasn't pristine. There were toys under the table, a bottle cap near the rug, a folded blanket halfway on the floor, and somehow, Kaylin looked more at ease here than he ever did in a corner office. I'm not trying to push my way back in, he said. I know I messed up, not just once, but I'm not here to fix it all. I'm just here to be here. Nalia nodded slowly. I don't need you to fix anything, she said. I just needed to know you wouldn't disappear again. He looked at her. Steady. Warm. I won't. Minutes passed. Neither of them spoke. Outside, a car door slammed 2 blocks away. Inside, the baby monitor clicked gently with Naomi's soft sleep noises. And still they didn't speak. There was no apology speech, no rekindled kiss, no soft music playing, just presence, and sometimes that's enough. When Kaylin finally stood to leave, she followed him to the door. But this time, when he opened it, she didn't just say goodbye. She said, "Same time tomorrow?" He paused, met her eyes, and smiled. "Yeah." Same time, the apartment was still. Lamps dimmed, toys tidied, bottles washed and drying on a towel near the sink, the kind of quiet that parents pray for. Kaylin sat on one end of the couch, back slightly sunk into the cushions. Nalia sat on the other, one leg tucked beneath her. Between them, a throw blanket lay folded, untouched. The baby monitor glowed on the coffee table, its faint static a gentle reminder that the house wasn't empty, just at rest. Naomi had curled up on her side tonight without a fuss. Luca finally stopped trying to sing after bedtime. Micah only needed one story. They were all growing. Fast. And in this silence, something else had started growing too. Kaylin didn't look at her right away. He just stared at the wall across from them, the framed picture of the 3 babies at 3 months old. Crooked in the corner, hung with a plastic hook and hope, Nalia followed his gaze. "They've changed everything," she said. He nodded slowly. "They've changed me." A pause. Then, "You too," he added, quietly, without weight. Nalia pulled the blanket into her lap but didn't wrap herself in it. Her hands were restless, folding and unfolding one corner. She glanced over, not meeting his eyes. "There's something strange," she murmured, "about letting someone back in, after life forced you to grow without them." Kaylin said nothing. He didn't rush her. She didn't expect him to. She appreciated that more than he probably realized. The air between them wasn't cold, just full of history, unspoken, unfinished, but not unwelcome. The TV stayed off. The clock ticked softly. Nothing begged for their attention but the quiet space between two people, finally breathing the same peace. They weren't back together. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, they weren't standing on opposite sides of a decision. They were sitting side by side in a moment neither of them tried to escape. And that was something. The blanket now lay between them like a silent witness, neither barrier nor bridge, just something soft, something real. Nalia exhaled slowly, her fingers grazing the corner of the couch cushion. "There's something I never told you," she said, her voice low but steady. Kaylin looked over, his expression patient. "I wasn't scared of being pregnant," she said. "Not really." He stayed silent, encouraging. "I wasn't even scared of raising them alone. I've spent most of my life handling things alone. What scared me, what still scares me, was falling for you again." His eyes softened. "I didn't want to need you." She laughed, but it held no humor, just a crack in her composure. "Because needing someone gives them power. Power to walk away. Power to rewrite your piece. I had just gotten my life calm again. I didn't want to lose that." He didn't rush to defend himself, didn't offer promises or pretty lines. He let her speak. He let her feel. "I thought, if I told you, and you wanted them, you'd take them. You had all the money, all the access, and I knew love doesn't always matter in courtrooms." Her voice dipped lower. "But also, I was afraid that if I let you in, I'd stop recognizing my own strength." She turned toward him. "And I've fought too hard for that." Kaylin leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "You never stopped being strong. You didn't push me away because you were weak. You did it because you knew what safety looked like. That takes more strength than people think." A pause. He looked at his hands. "I didn't come back to prove I'm worthy of them. I came back because I'm learning how to be worthy of you." Her eyes welled, but she didn't cry. Not this time. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of everything they'd never said, full of the mistakes, the missed chances, the learning. And now, maybe, the healing. She leaned back against the couch, head tilted toward the ceiling. "I don't have a map for this," she murmured. "Neither do I," he said. And that somehow was a comfort. The weight of everything they'd said hung in the air, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Outside the window, porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood, one by one, small glows settling into the evening. Inside, the hum of the refrigerator played under the soft rhythm of 3 sleeping babies breathing steady through the monitor. Kaylin didn't speak. Neither did Nalia. They just sat, and for the first time in a long time, she let her shoulder rest gently against his. No lean, no clutch, just contact. Simple, steady, human. It wasn't a grand moment. No kiss, no dramatic declaration of love. But her head tilted slightly, just enough for the curve of her temple to find the edge of his arm. Didn't tense. Didn't ask for more. He simply stayed. There was a kind of peace in that silence, a different kind than she'd built on her own. Not the peace of control, the peace of trust. Of finally, cautiously, letting someone else breathe in the same space without taking all the air. She didn't say, "I forgive you." He didn't say, "I still love you." Neither needed to, because healing didn't require narration. It required presence. The night stretched on. Time passed slowly, but not aimlessly. Their hands didn't meet. Their lips didn't touch, but their shoulders did, and that was the most honest they'd been in a long time. By the time the clock crept past midnight, she hadn't moved, and he hadn't left. The babies shifted in their sleep. The house sighed, and for the first time since everything broke open, neither of them felt alone. There was no grand aisle, no rented ballroom, no crystal chandeliers, just sunlight spilling through the backyard trees and the faint scent of fresh grass. The garden behind Nalia's small home had been cleaned and trimmed by hand. A few folding chairs formed a crooked half-circle. A string of white lights zigzagged across two trees like someone's idea of magic on a budget. Micah wore suspenders, one strap falling off his shoulder before the vows even started. Naomi had flowers tangled in her curls. She refused to walk in a straight line, twirling barefoot in the grass instead. Luca proudly tossed handfuls of petals with both fists, never once looking where he was going. It was chaos, beautiful, perfect chaos. Nalia stood beneath an old tree, wearing a simple cream dress that didn't cost more than 2 days' groceries. Her hair was pinned back with baby's breath flowers. She held no bouquet, just Kalen's hands. He wore a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled, no tie, no pretense. The only thing expensive on him was the look in his eyes. The officiant, her neighbor from 2 doors down, smiled softly and kept his speech short. Just vows, just breath, just yes. There were no photographers, no magazines. No guests flown in from other cities, just the people who'd seen the struggle, her friend from the diner, her nurse from the maternity ward, his old assistant, the lawyer who helped her file for custody, for free. When the vows were done and the rings exchanged, Naomi clapped. Luca shouted, "Yay!" like he was cheering for a cartoon. And Micah? He bit the corner of his cracker unimpressed. Nalia and Kalen kissed, finally, slow, small, and soft, the kind that doesn't try to impress anyone. The kind that says, "We're home." Afterward, everyone stayed for lemonade, fried chicken, and cornbread. The twins spilled juice. The dog from next door snuck a biscuit. Naomi fell asleep in the gift basket. It was the opposite of polished. It was real. And Nalia, sitting on a folding chair in a wrinkled dress, feet sore but heart whole, knew she wouldn't trade it for the world. The backyard quieted as twilight crept in. Kids began to yawn. Chairs scraped gently across the grass. Laughter faded into murmurs. And while Kalen helped tie Naomi's shoe again, because she kept stepping on it, Nalia stood near the edge of the deck, her eyes distant. Memories came without invitation, like small threads pulled gently from a spool. She saw herself behind the counter at the diner again, the way her apron never fit right. How she kept napkins tucked in her back pocket because someone always spilled something. She remembered the man in the corner booth, Kalen, quiet, unreadable, tipping well but never talking much. Until he asked if she was okay, and she didn't know how to answer without crying. Then the hospital flashed back, her grandmother's faint voice. The beeping machines, the bill folder with red ink. That night behind the diner, the moment she let her pride down just enough to whisper the amount she needed. The silence afterward, the way he didn't hesitate, not to shame, not to bargain, just to help. She thought of that hotel room, not in scandal, but in calm. How it felt like the first time in years someone looked at her without expecting her to smile through exhaustion. How he held her hand like it mattered. How she slept that night, for real. Then came the ultrasound, the doctor's raised eyebrows, the soft words, 3 heartbeats. Her own heart froze, then cracked wide open. She remembered leaving the city, the late-night rocking chair sessions, the lonely courage of motherhood, the duck pond, the screwdriver in his hand, the quiet presence on her couch. Now here they were, married, but not because of pressure or image, because of choice. Because through every single detour, disappointment, and misunderstanding, they had never stopped choosing in small ways to show up. A breeze lifted through the trees. Kalen turned toward her, holding Luca on one hip, a juice box in his other hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She blinked once, smiled faintly. The long way home. Love doesn't always roar. It doesn't always arrive with fire or drama or declarations shouted from rooftops. Sometimes it shows up quietly, wearing a hoodie, holding a bag of muffins. Sometimes it apologizes without using the word sorry. It fixes a crib without being asked. It reads bedtime stories while the bottles cool on the counter. It listens more than it speaks. And sometimes, it waits. What happened between Nalia and Kalen wasn't perfect. There were no smooth roads, no flawless choices. There was pain, distance, distrust. But there was also grace. Not the kind you earn, not the kind you beg for. The kind you give, freely, without conditions. The kind that says, I see the mess, I see the fear, I see the walls, and I'm still here. Nalia didn't choose him because he was rich. She didn't keep the babies to manipulate his heart. She didn't marry him for comfort. She built her home one moment at a time, through sweat, softness, and the kind of bravery people rarely talk about. Love isn't always loud. It's not always fireworks and declarations. Sometimes it sounds like a baby's laugh, or silence on a couch with shoulders touching, or 3 toddlers learning to walk in a house that finally feels like home. So if you're waiting for love to arrive in a flash, look again. It might already be here, showing up in small, ordinary acts of devotion. Because in the end, love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the form of grace, and in that grace we build families. If this story moved you, even a little, share it with someone who could use a spark of hope today. A reminder that love isn't gone. It just shows up quietly sometimes. Hit that subscribe button. Tap like if you believe in love that grows slowly. Drop a comment if this reminded you of someone you care about. This channel is all about real, raw, beautiful stories, and we've got plenty more on the way. See you in the next one, and until then, stay kind, stay strong, stay listening.